First of all, the Catholic emphasis, the emphasis on traditional faith and order. When the Reformation took place in England, just as in other places, there were two responses. There were those who wanted to hang on to as much as possible of what had been inherited. Yes, certain abuses had grown up in the Middle Ages that had to be put right, and changes were necessary, but to the minds of some, that was no reason whatsoever to throw out the baby with the bathwater. So there was a conservative force at work, wanting to hang on to as much as possible of the historic faith and order of the Catholic Church. This Catholic character, rooted in what has been received, is clear in the Constitution of the Anglican Church of Australia. The first of three unchangeable fundamental declarations in our Constitution says this: "The Anglican Church of Australia, being a part of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church of Christ, holds the Christian faith as professed from primitive times, and in particular as set forth in the creeds known as the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed." The Catholic emphasis. This Catholic character emphasises continuity with Christ and the original Church, the sacraments as means of grace, episcopal ministry and authority as a vehicle for unity, and the primary expression of the Church being a diocese gathered around its bishop. It's spelled out further in the third fundamental declaration in our Constitution. "This Church will ever obey the commands of Christ, teach his doctrine, administer his sacraments of holy baptism and holy communion, follow and uphold his discipline, and preserve the three orders of bishops, priests and deacons in the sacred ministry." That strong sense of historical continuity. But a big part of what was going on at the time of the Reformation in England was a struggle for political power between the King of England and the Pope. In particular, the King didn't want Rome appointing English bishops. Given the role exercised by bishops at the time, the right to appoint bishops in England gave the Pope enormous temporal power. The King wanted that authority himself. So Henry passed an act abolishing the customary payments to Rome by newly appointed bishops in England. He gave authority to archbishops in England to consecrate bishops whom Rome would not. English bishops could only be appointed on the nomination of the King. And England still has that legacy today. The Crown Appointments Commission nominates to the Prime Minister, who advises the Queen, who nominates a single name to the cathedral chapter of the diocese in question, which elects the only person nominated by the Crown. Henry did away with appeals to the Pope. The King was in charge, the doctrine of the royal supremacy. Now, this struggle for power was going on in other parts of Europe at the same time. This is the context in which Henry tried to detach England from papal power by making himself the head of the Church in the 1530s. Now, of course, there were religious issues in the Reformation as well as political ones, sparked by debates elsewhere on the continent. But the Reformation in England was affected by acts of state. The King in Parliament asserted the supremacy of the Crown over everything and everyone else, especially over external powers. Now that caused some difficulties for the Catholic wing of the church, which wasn't keen on emphasising the crown and the state as sources of authority in relation to the faith. That wasn't their cup of tea at all. They wanted it quite clear that the authority of the English bishops was conveyed through historic succession from the apostles, reaching back to Christ himself. After Henry's death, Mary tried to reassert papal power in England, leading to toing and froing over the years between the papalists on the one hand and the reformers and the Puritans on the other. And you can read the interesting battles and victories reflected in the development of our prayer books, among other places. So the Catholic emphasis in Anglicanism looked for continuity with the traditional faith and order of the church and looked to shore up ecclesiastical, if not Roman, authority.